Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this session. I hope you're all enjoying Municon 2021. My name is Karen DeNicola, and I am with Ecology's Water Quality Program headquarters, and I'm the moderator for this talk, Global Solutions to Local Stormwater Challenges, by Jane Dewell, who oversees the Maritime Stormwater Program at the Port of Seattle, and Stefano Mazzilli with PureBlue. During their presentation, please type your questions in the chat. The questions will be answered live following the presentation. Thank you, Jane and Stefano. We're looking forward to your presentation.
Great. Thank you, Karen. The Port of Seattle includes Seattle-Tacoma Airport and the Maritime Division, which encompasses facilities from Shilsha Bay Marina to the Duwamish Waterway. Valuing the environment and sustainability come from the top. Early in 2000, the port defined our century agenda, which includes the goal of being the greenest seaport in North America. The project here is supported by the Marine Stormwater Utility, which I manage. Our utility is responsible for stormwater regulatory compliance and maintenance of the port's stormwater infrastructure. This utility was the first, and so far possibly the only, formed by a port in the US. Our programs comply with City of Seattle and Washington State stormwater codes, regulations, and permits, which are some of the most stringent in the US. Drivers for improving stormwater quality in the region include endangered salmon species and the health of orcas in the Salish Sea. Next. The port wanted to explore stormwater treatment and best management practices from national and international ports, suspecting that there were some great innovations out there. PureBlue Aqualist was already involved as an accelerator for stormwater innovation, so we contracted them to conduct this work. A project goal was to identify innovative stormwater treatment systems and best management practices relevant to ports and similar facilities. The port's long-term intention is to pilot and evaluate innovative systems on our properties and to share this information with others. Constraints for systems on port properties include that we're heavily developed and paved properties with a mix of industrial, such as our container terminals, and commercial, offices, fishing docks, marinas. We're directly over or adjacent to rivers, bays, and the sound, and often the infiltration is unfeasible. Since many of our properties are on fill lands, have high water tables, and are over historically contaminated sites. Challenges for Aqualist included methods for appropriate commercial industrial properties that are closely proximate to waterways. Addressing pollutants of concern in the Puget Sound area is copper and zinc, as well as petroleum byproducts and dust from tires and brakes. Desired technologies for us included those that are non-proprietary, have small footprints, and have data available to demonstrate effectiveness. Stefano.
Thank you. So as Jane had said, the project focused on identifying stormwater management solutions that can reduce these pollutants that are important to Puget Sound recovery. And therefore are relevant to municipalities and industry in the region that often face some of the similar constraints. It offered a really interesting opportunity for us as we were seeing two challenges as we were finishing the second cohort of the Aqualist Accelerator, which was helping stormwater and wastewater startup companies bring their technologies to the region. The first of these was finding those that were willing to try a best management practice or technology that was from somewhere else to be the first one in the region, or even the second or third. And the second real challenge was finding those that were then willing and able to go a step further and partner with these companies or with these research groups, and then undertake some of the local testing to show effectiveness data and local application that people expect to build trust with a new innovation from somewhere else. The ports seem to hold a special place here, and we're excited to explore this with both the Port of Seattle and through ports across the US and elsewhere. So we did this through a two-step process. The first I'll talk about is the discovery or direct interview process with ports across the US and across the world. And then the second was a more traditional scouting or search, technology search. It's called scouting and vetting with the accelerators. So with the discovery process, we ended up having 12 meetings with major ports across the US and Europe. And this was really to gather information on their stormwater situation and their practices. We chose those ports based on selecting from a number of criteria about their sustainability and particularly their experience in innovation in stormwater. For example, looking at the American Association of Port Authority Awards, or standards such as the Environmental ISO standard or the EU Eco Management and Audit Scheme. We ended up reaching out to 36 of those across the world and had 12 meetings. And then the 7 that are listed here, we invited for a US-focused peer-to-peer session that was hosted with the Port of Seattle remotely during COVID. This was actually the first time that these particular ports and these practitioners had got together to share their experiences specifically on stormwater innovation. So overall, what we learned was not too surprising. We found that the Port of Seattle and ports, particularly on the West Coast, were quite well advanced, particularly in piloting homegrown solutions and getting some of that testing and effectiveness data, which Jane can go into some details following for the Port of Seattle. We found that many were relevant across and between regions. For example, the lightweight green roof that's shown here in the center from Baltimore, Port of Baltimore, while others were more regionally focused. For example, a real focus on heavy metals, specifically for the Pacific Northwest, which was less transferable to, say, Chesapeake, which had a focus more on nutrients. And you can see in the Port of Baltimore, they had a biogas, really interesting biogas project that was looking at reduction of phosphorus and nitrogen. Lastly, it was interesting to see the Port of San Diego's Blue Economy Incubator. This is a model that we might want to consider here in our region. They integrated some of the work that we'd done previously as an accelerator to support 9 projects last year, some of which were in stormwater, particularly in testing and medias. This informed then the more traditional search that we did, which was 3 phases for actual technologies. The first was just a review of all of the major conferences in the US. This included StormCon, as well as WEFTEC and international conferences in Asia and Europe. And we used a research framework to kind of narrow down that selection. So we started with criterias that are important and quite difficult to get some of that information and relevant to municipalities and industry here, and particularly to the port. For example, the level of maintenance and the specific performance. And then used a rating system that we worked through with the Port of Seattle and with their consultants to finally bin these into a number of categories. So we ended up with 15 technologies that the port selected from this that were meeting their near-term needs and their goals for 5 to 10 year planning for what they might pilot or try. So I can run through a few examples on this, but please do reach out if you want to get into any of the other categories specifically on the technologies that were identified. Overall, it was interesting that some of them we were quite familiar with. For example, Paver Guide at the bottom here, which is a sub-base that goes under any permeable paver surface, and because it's a large void space, can catch large storms, and also then is quite cost effective in sidewalks and highly urbanized areas because of the reduced costs in digging. This has actually come through our accelerator program and also matched what the port was interested in, and has a demonstration site with ECOS and Equinox in Georgetown if you want to see it. Others were specific to what the port was looking for short term and had plenty of data in cases of being implemented elsewhere, such as this, the middle here where you've got these metal filtration media. And yet others again were interesting in the longer term and could actually address multiple pollutants such as the smart sponge shown at the top. Now I'll pass over to Jane, who can give some examples, particularly for what other ports were interested in when they had the peer-to-peer session for what the Port of Seattle has been doing with their innovation.
Great, thanks, Stefano. For more than a decade, the port has developed and installed a variety of innovative stormwater treatment systems. I want to acknowledge that my predecessor, Marilyn Guthrie, and Scott Silcox, who manages the marine maintenance team, are key parties to this development and these innovations and inventions. We're really fortunate to have a marine maintenance group that really gets into invention and monitoring. Two of the small footprint systems that we've been using primarily on our municipal or phase 1 municipal permit properties include the oyster shell downspout barrels. We have these installed on commercial and a few industrial properties as well to treat roof runoff. An initial concern when we started using these was treating galvanized roofing, which can leach zinc. But we also have installed at buildings near elevated highways that help address roadway dust that contain both copper and zinc. The splash box on the right is a bioinfiltration system in a box, basically a rain garden in a box that employs a mix of treatment media. Our current pilot includes using activated carbon, biochar, or crushed oyster shells, or a combination of these with mulch and soil on top to support plant growth. This also is a fairly small footprint, taking from 1 to 2 parking spaces, which was key in me being able to get it located on our properties. Current locations include a roof near Fisherman's Terminal and a maintenance yard parking lot. We collect water quality samples up to about 4 times a year, and the results include 50 to 80% reduction in metals, copper and zinc, and 50% reduction in turbidity. Next. Priorities for the work that Aqualist carried out for us involve the port acting as a testing ground for innovative stormwater system evaluation. We want to use our experience and resources to pilot stormwater treatment technologies, validate, and share. We will continue to support our port operations and tenants with information on effective BMPs and stormwater treatments, but we also want to collaborate with ports and with others. Some current collaborations include ECOS and their Equinox site. They have 2 oyster downspout barrels installed there, and they are doing additional monitoring on those. Also, Taylor Shellfish has been a key partner and has been our supplier of oyster shells for over a decade. The 7 ports that Stefano mentioned earlier, we hope to continue collaborating with as well. Next steps for us include expanding our role in identifying and piloting new stormwater treatments on our properties and contributing to the understanding of ecosystem benefits from improving water quality in the Salish Sea. Stefano will add to this.
Thank you. And so, yeah, in conclusion, I'd just like to give a regional perspective on this from some of the other activities that we've been involved with. I think we can do more for a coordinated approach to particularly the in-situ testing and application of new technologies and best management practices and address some of the regional gaps. The first opportunity we have is really linking and building on the existing testing. We have in this state an excellent process for municipal tape testing, which I think Carla and Doug are about to present on following in another room, compared to the national level, which is still going forward. However, there are barriers and challenges to the transfer from this testing to scale and implementation, particularly when we consider not just municipality, but industrial permittees. There's also recognised barriers in financial incentives, etc., to scale. Together, we could consider this the last mile of innovation, trying to get things in the ground. We have really good examples in Washington state itself from other sectors. For example, the energy sector and in maritime. With Maritime Blue, they're able to now link and sustain funding in coordination and some of the accelerator or incubation functions for this application, you know, one of these 4 steps that we've linked up here on the screen. The green economy recommendations that we were involved in last year show these 4 sequential steps, but kind of set out a roadmap specific for stormwater and wastewater. And these approaches have worked elsewhere in the US. Running through them briefly, we've seen quite a bit of this today. The annual technology search is not much different to what the Port of Seattle supported. Needs assessments, we have had quite a lot of this already, and we've got many ongoing, and I would refer our colleagues that are industrial stormwater permittees to get involved with one that I've put the link on the right here, specific for industrial permittees. And then finally, this support for those first best management practices and innovation applications. These are the examples that the Port has shown with Gradex boxes and oyster barrels. Together, these experiences do make a good case, I think, for the future and how we can leverage port engagement in some kind of regional testing bed network for stormwater innovation. So thank you for your time and look forward to your questions or any follow-up on email.
Great, thanks.
Thank you so much, Jane and Stefano. We have time for a few questions if folks want to enter them into the chat while we're waiting for some questions to come in. I wonder, Jane and Stefano, can you give us some idea of what is the upper limit of the area that could be treated by one of your splash boxes or oyster barrels?
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I didn't compile the information on our splash box, but I did have a comparison ready for our oyster barrel. Actually, it's not a direct, but anyway, we originally started using the oyster shells in catch basins in a maintenance yard, our marine maintenance yard in South Horton Street. And we were treating about 1 acre of an active maintenance yard with 1.5 cubic yards of oyster shells in those 3 catch basins, so 0.5 cubic yards per catch basin. That was under an ISGP permit at that time. And so we would inspect them as needed, generally at least quarterly. And also typically we were changing out the oyster shells at about 1 year. For the application at a commercial building, we have our Terminal 102, which is at the southern tip of Harbor Island. There are office buildings that are close to the West Seattle Elevated Bridge, and we decided we wanted to test out the oyster downspout barrels during adding them to the building during a re-roofing project. Because of the dust we were suspecting that might be contaminating the roof and could be adding to copper and zinc in runoff. It was a municipal property, so we weren't required to do stormwater testing, but we used ISGP protocols for the parameters for copper and zinc. And in that location, we were treating about twice the area, about 2 acres of roof area with 1.5 cubic yards of oyster shells split throughout the barrels. Again, we were monitoring that quarterly and have been taking samples, and that was what was behind the 50 to 80% reduction in metals data that I was using. Does that help?
That's great. A question came in. Do you have the removal efficiency of copper and zinc for those barrels used in the catch basins?
Well, just like I said, we do have more specific data. We have 2 locations that we're testing on a regular basis. So like I said, it was 50 to 80% reduction in copper and zinc. And if someone wants or more detailed data, I'm happy to share.
All right, so if folks in the audience want to follow up with Jane after the presentation, her contact information is on the screen right now. It's also in the program. Does anybody have any more questions for Jane and Stefano? All right, well, thank you very much, Jane and Stefano, for addressing this topic. If anybody does come up with more questions, or please do contact the presenters. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and have a great rest of your day at Municon.
Thank you.
Thank you.